It was -23 outside, and I was sitting on the floor of my bathroom in Sudbury, Ontario, with my back against the cold tub, trying to remember how to breathe. That's not a metaphor. I genuinely could not get air in properly. Every inhale felt like someone had wrapped a fist around my lungs and squeezed. I had been feeling wrong all day. Not sick exactly. More like my body was sending a signal I didn't know how to read. A tightness in my chest that started that morning and had been getting steadily worse since dinner. By 9 o'clock, I was sweating through my sweater. By 10, I was on the floor. I'm 31 years old. My name is Nadia, and I want to tell you what happened on the worst night of my life, and about the person who showed up for me when absolutely no one else did. I called my mother first. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. I tried my father on his cell. Voicemail. I tried the landline at the house I grew up in, the number I've known by heart since I was 7 years old, and it rang and rang and rang until the answering machine picked up and I heard my dad's voice, the recorded version, the cheerful one he put on there years ago, telling me to leave a message. I left one. I said I thought something was wrong with my heart. I said I was alone and I was scared. Then I called my brother. He's 2 years older than me, lives 40 minutes away in Garson, and he picked up on the second ring. I felt my whole body release with relief when I heard his voice. That relief lasted about 11 seconds. He told me he couldn't come. He said he and his girlfriend were in the middle of something. When I told him I thought it might be my heart, he said, and I am remembering this word for word because it is burned into me permanently. Nadia, you've always been dramatic. Take an aspirin and lie down. Then he hung up. I sat there on the cold tile floor and I called my mother 3 more times. I called my father twice more. I called my brother again and he let it go to voicemail. In total, I made 11 calls in 22 minutes to the 3 people in this world who were supposed to be my family, and not one of them answered. Here is what I need you to understand, because I already know what some people will say, and I saw it in the comments of a similar story I came across once. People asking why she didn't just call 911 immediately, calling her foolish, calling her dramatic. When you are alone at 10:30 at night and you are frightened and your chest is crushing you and your hands are shaking, your brain doesn't run through a logical checklist. Your brain reaches for the people who are supposed to love you. That's not stupidity. That's what family is supposed to be for. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was terrified. And my first instinct, the instinct that every child carries no matter how old they get, was to call my parents. But they didn't answer. None of them did. It was my neighbor who called 911. I didn't even know she had heard me. Her name is Marta, and she's in her early 70s, a retired school teacher who moved into the unit next door about 8 months ago. We'd shared maybe a dozen conversations in the hallway, the kind where you talk about the weather and the parking situation, and the fact that the elevator takes forever. She knew my name, I knew hers. That was the extent of it. She told me later that she heard me slide down the wall. The apartments share a thin partition, and she heard the thud, and then silence, and something told her it wasn't right. She knocked on my door. I couldn't get up to answer it. She called through the door, asking if I was okay, and when I managed to say no, she called 911 from her own phone and stayed in the hallway talking to me through the door until the paramedics arrived. The paramedics got there in 9 minutes. They were incredible. Calm and fast and competent in the way that makes you feel like you are in the right hands even when you're terrified. They got me on a stretcher and into the ambulance, and the last thing I remember clearly, before things got blurry, was one of them saying my blood pressure was very low, and they needed to move. At the hospital, they determined I was having a myocarditis episode, inflammation of the heart muscle, likely triggered by a viral infection I'd had 2 weeks earlier that I thought was just a bad cold. It's more common than people realize, and it can come on fast. In serious cases, it can be fatal. Mine was serious enough that they admitted me immediately and put me on monitoring, and the cardiologist on call told me the next morning that if I had waited another hour or 2 on that floor, the outcome could have been very different. He didn't use the word death either. But I'm 31 years old and I understood what he meant. I was in the hospital for 4 days. My family showed up on day 3. I want to pause here and tell you about something that happened on day 1, because it matters more than anything else in this story, and I need you to understand it before I get to what my family did when they finally appeared. On the morning after I was admitted, I woke up disoriented and frightened and very alone. There was a nurse checking something on the monitor beside my bed, a woman named Teresa who had been kind to me the night before when I was admitted, and I asked her if anyone had come. She told me that my emergency contact, my mother, had been reached by phone. She told me my mother had said she would come when she could. Nobody came that day. In the early afternoon, I was lying in that hospital bed in Sudbury in February with a monitor clipped to my finger and an IV in my arm, and I was trying very hard not to cry because crying made my chest hurt more, and a man knocked on the open door of my room. I had never seen him before in my life. He was somewhere in his early 60s, I'd guess, with gray at his temples, and the kind of face that looks like it spent a lot of time outdoors. Not rugged exactly, but weathered in a way that seems honest. He was wearing a dark green fleece, and he had a coffee from the Tim Hortons downstairs in each hand. He stood in the doorway and he said, "I'm sorry to intrude. I'm visiting someone on this floor. The nurses told me you might be alone, and I wondered if you'd like company for a few minutes. You can absolutely say no." I said yes. I don't know why. I think because there was something in how he asked, genuinely uncertain whether I'd want him there, not assuming, not pushing. He sat in the chair beside the bed and he introduced himself. His name was Hugh. He told me his sister was 2 rooms down recovering from hip replacement surgery and that he'd driven up from North Bay the day before and was planning to stay a few days. We talked for maybe an hour. He asked me what I did for work. I'm an early childhood educator. And he told me he was a recently retired high school science teacher. And somehow we ended up having a long conversation about the education system in Ontario and the pressures on teachers and what it's like to work with kids. He was funny in the dry, understated way that some people are, where you don't realize you're laughing until you're already laughing. At some point, Teresa came in to check on me, and she looked genuinely surprised to see me sitting up and talking. Before Hugh left, he asked if there was anything I needed. I said I was fine. He nodded, said he'd check in tomorrow if that was all right with me, and left. The next morning, he came back with a bag from the pharmacy down the street, dry shampoo, chapstick, a good moisturizer, a puzzle book, and a pair of thick wool socks, because he said hospital floors are always freezing, and he was right. He set the bag down on the chair without making a production of it, like it was just a normal thing to do for another human being, and we talked for another hour. I found out later from Teresa that Hugh had also done something else. He had gone to the patient services desk and asked quietly about my situation. He had learned that I was there without family, and that there was a question around my provincial health coverage. I'd recently moved from a different province, and there was an administrative gap in my OHIP coverage that was creating a complication around one of the follow-up tests the cardiologist wanted to run, a more detailed cardiac MRI that wasn't immediately covered in my situation. The amount wasn't enormous, but it wasn't nothing, and the test was being delayed while it got sorted out. Hugh paid for it. He just walked to the right desk and paid it. He didn't tell me. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't even mention it. I only found out because the cardiologist came in that afternoon and told me the MRI had been scheduled for the following morning. And when I asked what happened with the coverage issue, he told me it had been resolved by a family friend. I told him I didn't have any family friends at the hospital. He looked at his notes and then looked at me, and he said, "The gentleman who's been visiting you." I asked Teresa about it, and she confirmed it. She told me that in her years of nursing, she had seen a lot of things, but she said what Hugh did was one of the quietest acts of genuine kindness she could remember. She said he'd been very matter-of-fact about it, told the desk he wanted to stay anonymous, and went back upstairs to his sister. I lay in that hospital bed for a long time after that, staring at the ceiling tiles, trying to understand how a man I had known for 36 hours had done more for me than the people who had known me my entire life. My family arrived on the afternoon of day 3. My mother came in first, which is always how it goes. She sets the tone, and my father and brother adjust accordingly. She was wearing her good coat, the one she saves for occasions she considers important, which meant this visit had been prepared for. She was not hurrying. She did not look frightened or guilty or relieved. She looked slightly put out, the way she looks when she's been inconvenienced. Her first words to me were, "You look better than I expected." I didn't say anything. She sat down and started talking about the drive up. The 400 had been awful. There was construction near Parry Sound, even in winter, which she found outrageous. And she'd had to stop twice because my father's back was bothering him. My father stood near the window with his hands in his pockets and nodded at things she said. My brother leaned against the wall near the door with his arms crossed and looked at his phone. At some point, my mother mentioned that the reason they hadn't come sooner was that my brother's girlfriend's parents had been visiting from Calgary, and it was a significant trip for them, and it wouldn't have been right to disrupt the plans. She said this in the same tone she uses to explain why she can't make it to things: reasonable, organized, already closed to discussion. I looked at my brother. He didn't look up from his phone. Nobody asked me how frightened I had been. Nobody asked what it had been like to wake up in a hospital alone. My mother mentioned, at one point, that I really should look into making sure my hip transfer was sorted before something like this happened again, as though administrative preparation was the lesson to be drawn from a 23-year-old version of me nearly dying on a bathroom floor. They stayed for an hour and 20 minutes. My mother hugged me when she left, a brief, efficient hug, the kind that communicates duty fulfilled, and she told me to rest and to let her know when I was discharged so they could figure out logistics. My father patted my arm. My brother said, "Take care, Nad," without looking up. Then they were gone. I lay in the quiet after they left, and I thought about something Marta had said to me when she'd come to visit the day before. Yes, my 73-year-old neighbor I barely knew had come to the hospital before my own family. She had brought me a container of the cabbage soup she makes, which the nurses had to refrigerate for me, and she had sat with me for 2 hours and held my hand, and at one point she'd said, "You know, in my experience, some people reveal themselves in emergencies, and what they reveal is permanent. You can't unknow it." I couldn't unknow it. Hugh came by one more time before I was discharged. He brought his sister with him. She was on a walker post-surgery, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s who made me laugh twice in the first 5 minutes, and we all sat together in my room for an hour in the afternoon light. His sister told me that Hugh had been talking about me to her all week. She said, "He told me you had more grace than most people twice your age." Coming from my brother, that is not a small thing. I didn't know what to say to that. I'm not sure I have ever been told anything that hit me so precisely in the part of myself I usually keep protected. Before they left, Hugh wrote his phone number on the back of a hospital notepad sheet and told me to call if I needed anything at all during my recovery. He said it the way people say things when they actually mean them. Not as a social nicety. He said, "I mean that literally. Call if you need groceries brought up, or if you just need someone to talk to, or if something goes sideways medically and you need a second opinion on something." I'm a former science teacher, not a doctor, but I'm good at research and I'm not going anywhere. He and his sister have become people I talk to regularly now. We had dinner together in North Bay in April, all three of us around a table in their kitchen, eating roasted chicken and arguing about hockey in the comfortable way you do with people you trust. I don't have a word for what they are exactly. The words available, friends, family, chosen family, all feel slightly insufficient. They are people who showed me something true about what it means to show up for another person. What Hugh did for me, the MRI, the visits, the wool socks, the quiet steadiness, he never once mentioned it himself. I eventually brought it up, the payment, because I needed to address it, needed to try to pay him back, and he waved me off in a way that was so genuinely unbothered that I realized arguing with him would be more about my own discomfort than anything else. He said, "It was the right thing to do. That's all." And then he changed the subject. I found out later from the hospital's patient advocate office that Hugh had also flagged something with them. He had noted, in whatever formal capacity was available to him, that I had been a patient without family support who has also been dealing with a coverage gap, and that the hospital might want to review how those situations were handled to make sure no one else fell through the cracks. He hadn't told me he'd done that either. The patient advocate reached out to me directly, a few weeks after I was home, and that's how I found out. He just quietly made sure things were documented. Not for recognition, not so I would know, just because it was the right thing to do. My relationship with my family is something I've been working through carefully since February. I am not the kind of person who makes impulsive decisions about permanent things. But I am also no longer the kind of person who confuses obligation with love, or proximity with care, or shared history with genuine investment in who I am. My mother called me 2 weeks after I got home to ask if I was feeling better, and to mention that my cousin's engagement party was in May, and she hoped I was well enough to come, because it would look odd if I wasn't there. She said this in the same breath. The wellness check and the appearance management, in the same sentence. I told her I'd let her know. I'm still letting her know. What I know for certain, the thing that became very clear to me lying in that hospital bed in February, with a cardiac monitor and a bag of drugstore wool socks from a man I had known for a day, is that the people who love you don't need a reason to show up. They don't calculate the inconvenience first. They don't weigh your emergency against someone else's schedule. They hear that something is wrong and they come. Or they call back, or they stay on the line, Or they knock on your door through a wall because they heard a sound that didn't seem right. Marta knocked on my door. Hugh walked into my room with 2 Tim Hortons coffees and asked, very politely, if I'd like company. Nobody in my family answered the phone. I don't think I'll ever stop being sad about that, if I'm honest. Not angry. I've moved past the acute anger now. Just sad. The particular sadness of understanding clearly, finally, the difference between the family you were born into and the family that actually holds you. Those can be the same people. In a lot of lives they are. In mine, they turned out not to be. And I had to almost lose my life to see it plainly enough to stop pretending otherwise. If you are someone who has ever called for help and been met with silence, or convenience, or someone telling you that you're being dramatic, I want you to know that that silence says nothing about your worth and everything about their capacity. You are not too much. You are not dramatic. You are a person who deserves to be answered. And somewhere out there, maybe, is someone like Hugh, standing in a hospital doorway with 2 coffees, asking if you'd like company. I hope you say yes.